Hello, thank you so much for joining me on today's episode of Be My Guest. Today is a very special episode because it's not the first time I've met my guest. I met Claire when I was a producer on the daytime programme This Morning ITV. That was back in 2017, and she was a guest on the show. Claire was interviewed about the internal struggles she faced after giving birth to her beautiful son Theo, who she found out had Down syndrome only after giving birth to him. And I remember thinking at the time that Claire needed a lot more time to tell her story in full. Well, now I'm in the privileged position to give her that very platform. And we have a shared hope that Claire's story touches the hearts of current and all future parents of children with Down syndrome. We met in 2017, and that was when I was working on This Morning ITV, and you came on as a guest, and I produced your item on the show. And I remember at the time, little Theo, as he was then, he was very tiny, and I remember falling in love with Theo, and I remember falling in love with your story, which is why I knew that I had to interview you one day rather than Eamon and Ruth. I knew that I had to do this, and it's always been in the back of my mind. So first of all, it's what now, 8 years, and Theo is 8. How are you both? How are you both doing?
Well, yeah, we're really good, thank you. Theo, as you said, is 8. He's a very small 8-year-old because you probably remember that he was born at 29 weeks, born the size of my hand, and his hand used to be the size of my fingernail. So every time Theo makes a little growth spurt, we do a little internal whoop because it's good news. He goes to mainstream school. He's in year 3. That was always my fear back then. What would the future be like for him? And he has firm friends. And what is really lovely is that all the other families in his class say that he enriches that particular group of 29 other children. He's doing pretty well. He's learning to read. Maths is a little bit tricky, but children with Down syndrome are born with low motor skills because they have hypermobility. So writing for Theo, say, is pretty hard, but he does attempt it, and he goes into school with the biggest smile every day. He really does. He runs in and he has 2 great TAs, and finally the right team of people behind him. That has taken years. I often say I wish there was a handbook of answers for parents like myself, because I feel that it's taken nearly a decade to get it right. We are such a happy family, and in many ways, Theo's Down syndrome affects every living moment of our family life, but then in many ways it doesn't. I know that doesn't really make sense, but you see, I have 2 boys. They really, really get on. They're very, very close.
Because your other little boy, Freddie, because it was only a family of 3 when we met in 2017. So how's his relationship with Freddie?
It is the sweetest. I mean, if you're lucky enough to be a parent and lucky enough to witness a sibling relationship in the first place, I'd say that's gold dust. But to witness this particular relationship, which is obviously quite unique, is... Well, I suppose the only way I can describe it is pretty humbling, because they're quite similar developmentally. Freddie's nearly 5. Theo is sort of similar to that as well. It's like having twins, and they love the same things. They love playing with their trains, and they make up their little games with each other. Freddie understands Theo pretty well because he's used to some of the mispronounced words and things like that. So actually, Freddie works very well as sort of Theo's translator sometimes, and it's a really lovely, pure relationship. I saw something on Instagram the other day that said, if you don't know how to treat disabled people, look at how their siblings treat them, because there's nothing filtered, there's nothing judgmental. It's my brother is my brother, and that's the way it is. I wish that society would see people like Theo that way.
Well, it's doing what you're doing today, and throughout the year is talking about it and the challenges of it, the joys of it, the ups of it, the downs of it, and all of those things combined. That just putting it forward and getting the message out there to change things, which is exactly.
And I hear them speaking to. I hear conversation between them now. Now that would have been a given within typical family conversation, you wouldn't even think of that being a bonus, but in our family, it is. I hear them talk to each other, and it literally puts tears in my eyes. I'm getting emotional now thinking about it.
And then
It
it was...
wasn't, but I was quite naive when the results
Were
came
you?
back.
Why?
It was no one had really explained it to me. Actually, I think if someone had said to me, which they didn't, the odds should be 1 in thousands. It wasn't. It was 1 in hundreds, and that never rang any alarm bells with me. The NHS will only, I believe this is true, the NHS will only notify you or get you to look at it again if it's 1 in 100 and less. And mine was not 1 in 100 and less, it was 1 in 200 and something, which looking back now was a strong indicator. I just looked at the letter and thought, oh well, that one's not going to be me, and I threw it away. But weirdly enough, I always felt a bit different. I mean, obviously I was pregnant for the first time, but I do remember feeling quite frightened by it. Many mothers actually sometimes instinctively know. It was never on my horizon. I don't think I would ever have thought that it was me, but it was. So yes, we got the standard tests, and I carried on with my pregnancy. I wasn't feeling very well towards sort of 27, 28 weeks, which unfortunately the hospital, the NHS is very busy, and they just sort of sent me home going, oh, don't worry, you'll be fine. I was 38 at the time and already classed as a geriatric mum. What had started to happen was the flow in my umbilical cord had slowed down, and when Theo was scanned, before they realised he needed to come out, they'd said that he'd been deprived of nutrients and oxygen, and what his body had done is transferred everything up to his brain to keep his brain alive. So Theo was quite close to becoming brain damaged, because essentially my pregnancy was failing inside of me and nobody really knew.
Wow.
So when I went in for this sort of extra scan, that my midwife said, oh, it'll be fine, you're measuring small, but it'll be fine. And they all went deathly quiet and said, it's really not fine. This baby needs to come out now. And I was a first-time mum. You obviously never think it's going to happen to you. And when I go in and do my talks in, for companies, I'm not just raising awareness of Down syndrome, I'm raising awareness of prematurity, because I think it's such an enormous shock. We all can imagine what maternity wards are like, but actually walking into a neonatal unit was one of the most daunting things I'd ever done. It gets me emotional even thinking about it now.
Oh, bless you. See, so when you went in for that, you didn't come back out until you had a baby, right?
That's right, yeah.
Gosh, how many weeks was that into your pregnancy?
Theo came out at 29 plus 6. So it's just under 30 weeks. He's about 11 weeks early.
What did he weigh?
1.1.
1.1?
Yes. I remember hovering my hand over him, because I don't think I was allowed, perhaps I was allowed to maybe just touch his skin, but I hovered my hand over him and his feet and head were just popping out either side of my hand. That's how small he was.
Were you allowed to hold him immediately after the birth?
No. What happened is they take him out, and obviously I had a C-section for Freddie. It was a completely different experience, but with the emergency C-section for Theo, they whipped him out. About 10 people pounced on him on a table, getting lines into him and this, that and the other. And I saw him very briefly with an eye mask on, a hat, all the wires, and he was whisked away. And it was a couple of hours afterwards that I was wheeled down to see him, which is so very, very different from the experience I had with Freddie. I was like, right, can we play some Freddie Mercury on the airwaves? Because that's who I've named him after. Out he comes, straight on my chest. I must admit, I probably experienced some PTSD the second time, because I was like, wow, this is what it's meant to be like. Oh, okay. But then, of course, it gives you this huge iceberg-like gratitude for normality, which I know I wouldn't have had if I hadn't had that first experience.
How old was Theo when he was diagnosed of Down syndrome?
He'd been outside of me 3 weeks, so he'd just gone into being 32 weeks old, and of course should have still been inside of me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Did you know before, or when you were told about the diagnosis, was that the first time?
Yes.
Was
Yes.
it?
Yeah. I remember that day clear as day. I'd come into the hospital. By about 3 weeks in, I was starting to get used to the neonatal unit. It sort of begun to sunk in, and I was like, it's okay, we just need to get through the next couple of months. Every day was, frightening. What were they going to do? I came down one day and they'd stick a whole load of nanodes on his head, and I'm like, what are you doing? They said, well, we're testing for brain damage. It's just like, wow, I just collapsed to the floor. But that day, I came in and they said, is your partner with you today? I said, no, well, he's gone to work. And they said, you need to get him back in. And I'm like, why? And they said, well, we've had some blood test results come back, and there's what's been detected is something, as they described it, not life threatening, but life changing. And that's all they told me until Andy came in. They didn't want to tell me without Andy by my side. I can understand that, but that was an awful 40 minutes. Things were racing through my mind.
Of course.
Leukemia. What is it? And I could feel the stirrings in my body of trying to potentially take in another trauma when I'd only just dealt with one 3 weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
You never realise how much stress your body can take until you're in it. And then they sat us down, and it was actually delivered in because this is something that some parents talk about. It can be delivered in a, we're really sorry to tell you, but, i.e., this is bad news. It's different news, and I have to say, compliments to the Whittington Hospital, they just delivered it fairly matter-of-factly. But of course, it was bad news for me, because that's not what I was expecting, and they just said it's trisomy 21. And I said, what is trisomy 21? They said it's Down syndrome. Trisomy 21 stands for the third copy of the 21st chromosome, which is why it's World Down Syndrome Day on the 21st of March, being the third month of the year. And what was so weird, Rory, is that, I was a kid of the 80s, and the first image that jumped into my head, and it's so worrying because I'm an educated woman, was of a man dribbling in the corner rocking. And I'm like, where did I get that from? And I'm being very candid with you now, but where did I get that from? I'd never seen anyone with Down syndrome. So where did it come from? And I'll always remember that moment because, it worries me that people see it and think about it with outdated viewpoints like I had clearly had. 8 years on, if only crystal balls were operational, I would have seen my son at school, my son running around the playground, balancing, climbing, giving me a hug, going to bed really well, with a good diet, with health. I mean, wow, just with health. Back then, even with the prematurity, we were worried about the future, because were we going to be in and out of hospital? Doctors will tell you that children with Down syndrome often have health problems. Well, Theo wears glasses and he's got glue ear, which means there's fluid in the ear, which hopefully will drain away as his face shape changes. But that is it. Mm-hmm. He's probably missed less than 10 days of school since he started. I always remember a doctor said to me when we was one of our last appointments at the hospital before we were signed off after he was born. They see you for about a year with a premature baby. The doctor turned around to me and said, it's like he was never premature. Like, he's got a really good constitution. And I just looked my eyes up to the sky and thought, thank you. I did. I'm not a massively religious person, but there is a church in the hospital, and I spent hours in there. Hours.
Did you?
Yes. Hours crying, praying that it wasn't me. Because when we first got the diagnosis, they then said to us, but the diagnosis doesn't match the baby. I.e., he wasn't born with a hole in the heart. He was pretty strong despite everything that his entrance to the world. And they said, this is unusual. We're going to go and do another blood test just to make sure. So then we had this hybrid time. I couldn't eat. I could barely sleep to confirm that he had it. And in that time, I willed it not to be us. And I was literally willing the baby in the incubator not to be as he is, which is a really odd thing for a first-time mother. I mean, I literally, obviously I go into businesses and I talk about my story with my speaking partner, and I've told my story many times now, but we're delving quite close into it, and it the edges of that trauma still prick me. They're still there. It was a lot, and I talk about in my talk sort of this post-traumatic growth, but at the time when you're in the eye of a trauma, you think you don't have total control over what's going on. I think you do a bit. I think just to put one foot in front of the other, literally getting by day, and trying to not let the situation sap every ounce of joy out of your life. Like I literally would wake up, think about Down syndrome the whole day, go to sleep crying about Down syndrome, dream about Down syndrome, wake up, think about Down syndrome. It was just for those first couple of weeks it was like that, and I just thought, you know what, I'm never going to be happy again. I don't even know, because what happens is the future shuts down and it becomes this massive blank. It's so sad that our minds race to the worst case scenario, which mine did with that terrible image I've shared with you. But that's obviously not our lives now. So it really upsets me that these out-of-date perceptions are still very much around in this country, and even worse in other countries where it's seen as a curse. I'm not one of these mums that goes, hey, it's great, it's a blessing. You get what you get when you're pregnant, and your baby is your baby. And I think we still see things in black and white too much, because I have a typical child and I have a child with a disability. Well, actually, we don't know what the life is going to be like for that typical child, just as much as we don't know what that life is going to be like for the child with special needs. But it's worrying that the life of a baby gets boiled down to this one factor, Down syndrome or whatever. But that alone does not entirely mark their lives out. It makes me sad, because I actually had someone contact me the other day and said, we've just had a baby with Down syndrome, and the very first thing I said to them as well is, congratulations, because you've had a baby. Hardly anyone said that to me. I get the side tilt of the head, and it's and people don't know what to say, but then I wouldn't have known what to say either. So I can't judge that person for perhaps giving me a reaction that is slightly of pity sometimes, because people don't know the truth, because maybe I would have been that person myself.
When you do these talks and when you write in your blogs and articles, one thing that, because I haven't been through it, I can't quite understand, and I'd love to get an understanding of it, but you talk about grief. For me, grief automatically associates to death. What do you mean when you talk about you were going through grief at that stage?
Well, the grief is probably for the baby that I thought I was going to have, because I think as humans we project what we think our lives are going to be, and then when it goes in a different direction, there is a grief for that huge gap. And I just didn't know how to make the bridge. And the bridge is, of course, acceptance. And acceptance is not a linear thing. It just doesn't just fall into your lap. Of course, it takes a good while to let it into your life, I suppose. And my acceptance will be throughout my life. It took me a while to accept baby Theo with Down syndrome, and then I had toddler Theo, who hardly said anything whilst everyone else's children were, non-stop talking. Then, now when I remember when Theo started school, I felt very nervous. So I had school starter Theo, and now I have 8-year-old Theo, so slightly older. Of course, the gap between him and his peers is pretty gargantuan now, but because he's gone to a mainstream school, he's very socialised. If you were sitting behind him, say, At the cinema yesterday, we went to see Migration. He really got into it. He loved it. You wouldn't know if you sat behind him in a restaurant. You wouldn't know either, because he's learnt off his peers. But that grief, wow, that was like a suitcase of stones for me. It had already been half filled with the prematurity, and then it got loaded down with the Down syndrome, and I dragged that around with me for a while. I think when I went on this morning with Eamon and Ruth, it had started to get a little bit lighter, because when I first got that diagnosis, I was like, how am I going to tell people? How am I going to face the world? Now, what is everyone going to think? Which is pretty pointless thoughts. But back then, when you, as I say, you're right in the middle of it, your mind starts churning up very unhelpful, pernicious thoughts. And Thea was just over one when I think it was, yeah, just over one when we went on this morning. And I think by then I'd just gotten I'd gotten used to it. And it's not to say that I don't have a bead of grief in me still. I often wonder, what would Theo have been like if he hadn't inherited an extra chromosome? But then he wouldn't be Theo. And that's where that thought stops. But I do know that lots of parents grieve for not just the baby that you thought you were going to have, the life that you thought you were going to have, um, but actually life is different, but not that different. It's fine.
How did you reach this point over the years, especially at the start? Because you're taking little Theo home and you're not only learning how to be a mother, but also a mother raising a child with Down syndrome. How did you grow to the level of acceptance that you have now?
Well, for a start, I found on Instagram mothers that were a couple of years ahead of me. There is an amazing boy called Seb White, who was one of the first models with Down syndrome to model for M&S, and her mother wrote an incredible blog which inspired me to write my own. I'm still friends with Caroline now. Seb's now 16, so she was 8 years ahead of me, and just wrote about it in such a candid but beautiful way. Her life seemed as beautiful as the only way I can describe it. I wasn't ready to talk to the Down Syndrome Association, though I do now. But I'd looked at other people online, and also I had a baby in front of me that needed feeding and changing, and I got myself out into some mother groups. That was very hard, first of all, because I was the only mother, and everyone else was there going, oh well, he's got a little bit of colic, and I'm like, oh my god, I've just done nearly 4 months in hospital. That I used to get a little sort of internally cross with mums who just didn't get it. And again, I wouldn't have got it on the other side of the fence either. So how I did it was I just cracked on, because that's all you can do. And I'm the type of lady that, as I said, loves babies, and he was a lovely, lovely baby. And despite all the appointments we had, because that was the difference between Theo and Freddie. Theo was tested. We were going into hospital maybe once a month, so many tests, which at that point my mind was catastrophizing quite a lot, because I was traumatized. I was like, what are you going to find now? What's wrong? What else is wrong? So that, with Freddie, we went home. That was it. Everyone left us alone. But with Theo, I was in and out, in and out, in and out. So I guess the sort of the exceptional situation of that made the sort of tide recede a little bit slower than it might have done if I could have just gone home, say, like I did with Freddie. But it's the system that I had to grapple with at the beginning as well, because when I went back to work after a year, I don't know how I did that, but I did. You've got to find the right nursery. There wasn't that great advice out there. The nursery gets funding for Theo, but they were a terrible nursery and spent it on new carpets when they should have spent it on resources for Theo. And the fight with the system. But now my boxing gloves are nice and dusty. I know exactly what to do now. And we got the right help from and all of that, but it's taken a while. I really see, and I think I would have felt this without any without any of this that would have happened to Theo. Motherhood is such a privilege. My goodness, it is. Particularly at my age. I had my first at 39 and my second at 42. And I just feel so lucky that I get to do the school run every day, because now they're at the same school, which won't last because Theo, once he finishes primary school, I suspect we'll find him a special school. So right now, that morning run and the pickup, it's just an absolute bonus.
When you talk about, and this is even a change that I see in you over the past 7 years since we last spoke in 2017, is that when you talk about Theo, Down syndrome is a secondary thing that you're talking about with Theo. You're talking about Theo and Freddie as equal children, as equal boys, as equal humans, doing the same thing, going to school, about what they play, about their interests. But the Down syndrome, even in a conversation, in an episode about Down syndrome, it seems to be coming second. That's the difference I see in you.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I couldn't have put it better myself. Interestingly, when you talk about the equality, there's at the end of my talk, there's a slide up and there's a picture of the two of them in the paddling pool this summer. They're exactly the same size because he's a whopper. Theo is this willowy, thin child. I literally, he's still the size of a 6-year-old. That's due to the prematurity, but he's a very slim boy. Freddie's nickname in this family is Squidgy. But I say to people, so the child on the left, Freddie, he's protected by laws in this country in the womb. So if I'd aborted him after 24 weeks, I would be vilified. It would be illegal. People quite rightly would think I was a very wicked woman. Mm-hmm. But the child on the right is not protected. And it is legal in this country to abort a baby with Down syndrome just before they go down the birth canal. It's still legal in this country to do that. So if I'd aborted
up to how many weeks?
39 weeks.
Oh my.
Yes. But if I'd aborted Theo after 24 weeks, I would have been consoled. It's a law that a lady called Heidi Crowther with Down syndrome she took it to the courts of justice to try and get this changed, and she wasn't successful the first time, which all of us in the community were so saddened by, because it doesn't give out the right message. So that law is there. So if you detect, say, your baby has a life-limiting condition that maybe they'll live for a couple of days or a few hours once they're born, then you can do that. But Down syndrome is not a life-limiting condition. I have a boy at school learning to read. But if I had, let's say I had discovered it and, then I could have legally done that. And that, to me, I hate to use this word, but that's murder. Mm. That's really, really worrying.
You're a very different woman now compared to the woman you were when you were grieving, when you had that fear, perhaps a bit of anger. Was there a turning point for you?
Was there a turning point? Just trying to think. Oh, goodness, it was a long time ago. I actually think around about the time of doing this morning interview, because that was a huge thing. It was very nerve-wracking to go on the television and just say, okay, so this has happened to me and I did feel like this. I've always been really honest. And I think that was a bit of a watershed moment because I'd essentially shared it with the nation. Mm-hmm. I'd made peace with it myself to have been able to do that. And the more Theo grew and became just a healthy, happy boy, the more I worried less, because I could see him coming through. You talk about the diagnosis being second. The diagnosis was like a blindfold at the beginning. Mm-hmm. And my little baby, with every laugh and every delight that he gave me, started very slowly to peel it off. But it was a slow process. But the time that I did this morning, by that point, I'd gone, well, if I don't say something about this, because, even today, like up and down the land, there might be someone who gets that prenatal diagnosis who will be in a hospital room sobbing, crying, potentially, because it's such an enormous shock. Mm-hmm. But the shock would be lessened if there were more people with Down syndrome in our lives, because it would just be seen, be accepted. It's normal. Disability is a part of life, and we live in worrying times where you can almost order your baby. Well, I want a boy with blue eyes and want that. Well, it's unbelievable. I remember sitting on the tube looking around at everybody in the early days going, does everybody realise how lucky we are even to have made it Earthside? Because obviously I then had an understanding of how complicated making a baby is when the sperm and the egg come together. Well, you're lucky if it comes together in the way that it should do. And then you're lucky to have it stick, and you're lucky to have gone past 20 weeks. You're lucky to have had a safe birth. You're lucky to be here. And I'll always remember that. And that is how I feel about life, which is lucky to be here. Lucky to have happy, healthy children. That's all that matters. There's children in Theo's class that are gaming, that are already being tutored, that are under a little bit of academic pressure. That's never going to be our family. Freddie will benefit from that as well. That's just not the route.
I suppose it's very easy in those early days to compare yourself to other parents and to compare Theo to other children, thinking what other children might be able to do that Theo mightn't be able to do. I bet that's a difficult one to get over.
I don't think I'll ever get over it, to be honest.
Rory. Oh, really?
No, I don't think I will, because, you pick them up from school and they're coming out with, proper novels, or, little essays now. And, that's probably never going to be Theo, I don't think. Yet these kids are 8. They're like mini adults already. Comparison is it's one of the worst things you can do. It's a natural thing to do, and I compare the boys sometimes, and I shouldn't. But it also, I guess, reminds me of the unique path that we are on, and that definitely has its benefits. He doesn't game. He doesn't know what he doesn't play those things. He plays with wooden railway tracks and likes Paw Patrol, and so does Freddie. And it keeps us in this very innocent time, which is so short-lived now, with children growing up in these times where everything is on a screen and easy to get. I grew up in the 80s. We'd have to, if you missed something on the TV, well, you'd have to wait for it, or hope that your dad recorded it. But Theo has a very, very pure innocence, and I think that innocence in every child is lost way too early. But it's not in this family. And I do see that as a gift. It is hard to compare. That's never going to stop, because it's a natural human compulsion, I think. But then I just have to switch my thought into, well, if I don't have that, I have this instead. And there's huge benefits. What was he doing the other day? Oh, Freddie was being a little tyrant. And Theo looked at me and he went, Freddie rude. And I was like, that's right, Theo. Freddie is rude sometimes. So he'd said the right thing, learned a new word, and said it to me as if to say, cool, isn't he a little pest today? And I was like, yes, he is. And I hear them speaking to, I hear conversation between them now. Now that would have been a given. Within a typical family conversation, you wouldn't even think of that being a bonus, but in our family it is. I hear them talk to each other, and it literally puts tears in my eyes. I'm getting emotional now thinking about it.
The reason why I pause is because I am too. I am, because how beautiful is it that you don't take anything for granted, that you don't take him saying the word rude for granted. And I know what it means, because I've got an uncle who was born with Down syndrome, and I never think of him as having Down syndrome. Unfortunately, he can't speak and never has been able to. He's in his 50s now. I've never thought of that as something bad, because he's just my uncle. He loves boxes, and when I say boxes, I mean cardboard boxes, baskets in the shops. He just loves them. You don't have to have anything in them. He loves motorbikes. If he sees a motorbike,
Theo does as well.
Does he?
Yes.
He gets really excited. But And it's those beautiful little things that a lot of people take for granted, but you don't in your family, which is a gift.
Yes, it absolutely is. It really is, and it makes their relationship this really special golden thing. I was lucky enough to have had another baby without complications, and they just I foster their relationship greatly. They really love each other, and I say to Freddie when he's being a bit overbearing sometimes. I mean, Freddie's a lovely child. He's probably getting a bit of a bad rap here, but I say to him, you have the kindest brother in the world. You don't know how kind he is yet, but you will do, because Theo will go and get Freddie's shoes and put them in front of Freddie. He won't get out the car without knowing that Freddie's got out too. At supper time, I'll give him a cup of water. He goes, Freddie, and so I have to give him Freddie's water as well. He loves his brother. It's it's incredible to witness.
How have you, because you sound that you're very much in the present moment now with Theo, that you're celebrating all of his wins, all of his achievements. They don't need to be big, even the small ones, and they're probably the more important ones as well. But it sounds like you're not talking about the future a lot. Do you still have fear for the future? Or are you trying to live in the present moment with Theo as much as possible and not worry about that?
I think what you've just said is a lesson for all of us. We all need to live in the present moment a bit more. We have our phones which take us out of the present moment, which make us look at other people's lives or what we could have or what we don't have, or the other way around, looking at the past. Theo's a great leveler for that. I'm not going to lie. In 10 years' time, I will have an 18-year-old with Down syndrome. I won't have this cute little boy anymore. I will have a large person, probably, if he doesn't want to go somewhere, I can still sort of, get his hand and sort of drag him along. But in 10 years' time, I don't know. And I do worry about that. I've heard from other parents ahead of me that the support starts to fall off a bit. You don't get one-to-one in secondary school like you do in primary school. The routes into employment are a bit fuzzy as well. There's 1 in 5 people who are disabled in this country, and quite a lot of them are out of work. So I'm trying to, in the next couple of years, stay ahead of the game and start thinking about Theo's future a little bit. I do worry about it, but I do have to put those thoughts aside, because I learnt that lesson when Theo was a baby. I sat there and wasted hours of my life worrying about probably now, which I'm in now, and now is fine. And actually the now's always been fine. But when you are back there in just, weeks into hearing the news, that's unfortunately all you think about. But such a waste of mental energy. So I have to tell my brain that now is to switch off. I will deal with it when we get there. And I suspect 18-year-old Theo will surprise me as much as 8-year-old Theo is. And as long as the right support stays around him, which is a continual fight, but as long as it does, Theo will, I know, be reading and writing and be able to have conversations, understand money, understand life. I'll make damn sure he's got that by 18. I don't know how I'll get there, but I'll make sure that he does. Who he is just kindness, and there's a purity within him. And everyone who is lucky enough to have Down syndrome in their lives talks about this. And it's not this sort of, I'm going to, nice coloured spectacles on it. It is, and it is there. And it's it's humbling. It brings you back down to earth. There's so many moments when I either pick up Theo and the teacher goes, oh, he's had a great day with this, or his speech and language teacher, who's amazing, sends me a WhatsApp message going, just had the best lesson with Theo. He's been really engaged. It was beautiful. He said this. And I'm listening to this going, wow, for a start, I wouldn't even know all these amazing people ever existed. It brings me back down to earth. And I think everybody needs that. We're all up in the sky worrying about ridiculous things, and social media and all of this business, whereas actually I've got a child that keeps my feet on the ground. And again, I find that quite lucky.
This episode is a lot of it is geared towards parents who have children with Down syndrome or future parents who will have beautiful children with Down syndrome. But I want to touch on talking to the rest of us, because you said earlier about when you first said to maybe certain family members or friends that Theo has Down syndrome. And some people don't know how to react to that. Some people don't know the right language to use. And not even just about the diagnosis, but everyday people. I'm sure people might stare at little Theo. How can you help the rest of us in knowing what to say, knowing what to do?
Oh, it's a big question, Rory. Let's start with, an expectant parent. They will be shocked, they will be saddened, but the first thing you say to them is, congratulations, you're having a baby. And just to say that, nobody knows the future for any child, and this baby will surprise you. And there'll be unexpected gifts on the way. Yes, there'll be challenges, but my goodness, there's challenges with any child. And not to boil down your child's life to just one thing, which is Down syndrome. Interesting, people look at Theo more when we're out of London. I do get a bit tiger mummy and just go, oh, why are you staring at my child? He's just a child. Just see him as just a boy. And I get asked by strangers, oh, did you know? Did I know he had Down syndrome when I was pregnant with him? The insinuation being that if I had, he wouldn't be here. That's strangers asking me that, which I find
rude,
very unnecessary. I'd say I take Theo on public transport. I can see that Theo brings out the best in people. He makes people smile. He's sitting there on the underground, looking at the doors opening, closing, getting excited, knowing that we're going somewhere. And people may remember that little boy for years to come. So I just think it's telling everyone to keep their eyes open and just see what and who is in front of you first, before the diagnosis and all the worries and fears that come with that. That is inevitable. But it's the child first, the diagnosis second. Because no one knows what that little human is capable of. I mean, you've got George Webster on CBeebies. So, when Theo was born, there was maybe Sarah Gordy, who's now got an OBE, who's an actress on the television. I think maybe Corrie had someone. Now you've got a children's presenter on the television every single day with Down syndrome presenting live television. It's astounding. That man is. Can you imagine how proud his parents would be? And that's how I know I will feel. Whatever Theo achieves, I will feel prouder than any parent, because I know what it's taken to get him to achieve that. Whenever we see George, I say, look, Theo, that's like you. And that's all I say, because of course he doesn't see himself as any different at the moment, nor does Freddie. So just to see the child first instead of the diagnosis, because it just doesn't completely give you an answer of it is going to be like this. It is not. You do not know. What we don't know, we don't know. And that's that.
What you've done for Theo, it's remarkable. I knew that the first time that I met you. You were just, you were born to be Theo's mum, and little Freddie too.
Now you're making me cry.
The work that you've done is just amazing. But what has Theo done for you? How have you changed as a person since being Theo's mum?
Well, I never knew I had that much patience. I think every mother discovers that, but I have to have a lot. I literally have waited years to hear certain words, years. And it's made me see people with a disability in a different life, because when it's not your life, you don't necessarily have to engage in it or want to engage in it. I was just like, I must admit I'm a far better person after having Theo, but I have a compassion in me for people just for humanity now. I know it sounds a bit huge, but I do. I feel deeper And I see the ordinary as extraordinary because it is in our family. And I see that as an absolute brilliant perspective, almost like an armor. Because if I'm seeing everyday things as absolute bonuses, then it does make me a happier person. On the flip side, there are days that are tough and I still cry sometimes, not over the diagnosis, but over maybe some of the challenges or, that kind of thing. When I'm like, are we still in this place? Are we still doing this? But those are rare moments. And most of the time, I just, I look at both of them and I think, your body was made in my body, and that you're just miracles that you're here and you're happy and you're healthy. We had such an unhealthy start, potential brain damage, potential lung disease, all his organs had suffered inside of me, yet he's absolutely fine. Absolutely fine.
If you could, because that woman's a very different woman to where you are now, but if you had the chance, knowing what you do now, to talk to that woman in the hospital, it was full of fear, full of anger, even grief that we touched upon.
Yeah.
Knowing what you do now, what would you say to her?
I put my arms around her. Just give her a hug. Just say that this is not what you think it is. It was such an end for me. I just saw it as such a terrible, terrible thing. And I would have taken those adjectives away and said, it's not this terrible, terrible thing. It's just a thing. And you have a baby and you're a mother now. And that's that. I really would have given myself I was pretty hard on myself. I blame myself being an older mother. And it was tough. And I think your mind can turn itself into your enemy. So if I'd had the buttons to my brain, I would have pressed a few buttons to stop my mind spinning off into the places that it went to, which were some very dark places. And my future self would have said, just come and have a look. This is what you want. This actually, what it's going to be like is what you wanted. 2 sons, a happy family, a nice life. Thank God. Nothing's been lost here as much as you think it is. It's just been replaced by a different version of pretty much the same thing. That's what I would have said. But I would have given myself a huge hug because there were some very dark times in that hospital. It just, just sitting for 8 hours in those plastic chairs next to a bleeping incubator, next to other bleeping incubators, hearing all the alarms go off. Just that alone.
I want to end on this because you are so honest, and because that is such a great help to other people. And I want to shut up now and I want to give you the floor to finish this episode. And I want you to take your time with this one, however long you need. It's yours. I'm just going to switch off my microphone. I want you to talk directly to parents now today, listening to this, who are expecting a child with Down syndrome, and also future parents who don't yet know that they'll have a child with Down syndrome. It's all yours. What's your message for them?
Oh, what's my message? Okay, here goes. I would say to them that any life is a gift, and that we now live in a time where we can all share our lives a little bit more and go and look at the lived experience, because the lived experience will fill you with hope. Not just mine, obviously. There's so many young people out there making huge strides for the community, and knowing that whatever your child achieves will be a double achievement, because everything will be a bit more challenging for them. When they get there, it's like discovering the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, and that is no exaggeration. That really is not. Often Andy and I will look at each other and have tears in our eyes because Theo's done something that we didn't expect, or said something that we didn't expect. And just to say, don't let the tidal wave of bias and unconscious bias drown what you have inside of you. It's your journey, and that's really very, very important, because there's so much pressure these days, particularly on having the perfect life, the perfect baby, that there really is no such thing. Well, for any expectant parent out there, just please go and find a lived experience and see what our lives are like, because they're not a life to pity. It's not a life to cry about, even though I'm crying now, but it's not a life to cry about. Any life is worth celebrating, and boy oh boy, that little baby inside of you will really surprise you. I always remember my mum said that, Thea will surprise you, and guess what? She was right. The surprises may be, sometimes you have to wait for them a little while, but when they do come, they feel like miracles. So if you want a life that's peppered with miracles, just go ahead and try not to let the fear completely eat away at what you have inside of you. I'd say that.